for the rest of them. But here we are. We're at 8 o'clock Pacific and many other times with our panelists around the world. Welcome to the first Quilt and Learn presentation of the day, the first live session, where we're going to be talking about storytelling through quilts. We have a wonderful panel here with us. First, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Byrne. Although I have the English accent, I'm here in Oakland, in California. And I'm the host of Quilt and Learn. And then I'm just going to ask our panel to introduce themselves in the order that I have them on the screen, which is Pattie, Anne, Ali, Aline and Natasha, and Beth Ann. So Pattie, do you want to kick off the introductions?
Hi, I'm Pattie Klimek. I am in San Francisco, across California, across the bay from B. I am primarily a handwork advocate. I love to do handwork and I make all my quilts by hand, and I always introduce myself as a very proud hand quilter, hand piecer, and hand embroiderer. And doing these the storytelling by quilts is just like my bag. I love quilt history, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that too.
Awesome.
Wonderful. And Anne, go ahead.
I'm Anne Cardosa. I'm a life coach specializing in helping quilters with their emotional problems with UFOs and not being able to figure out what they want to do and feeling stuck and overwhelmed and all that good stuff. I'm located in Sacramento, California, so not too far from these other ladies. And I'm just excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. And on to Ali.
Hi, I'm Ali. I have also got a bit of a weird accent. I'm originally from Australia, but I live in Italy. I'm just outside Verona in northern Italy, about an hour from Venice, more or less, in the northeastern corner. I am a designer, a maker, an entrepreneur. I teach quilters, surface pattern designers, creatives from all around the world how to design, write, and sell their very own quilt patterns. I'm very into design. I love designing, drawing, sketching, all kinds of things like that. I got into quilting when I had my first baby. I think a lot of people might have a similar story. We kind of get into quilting when you have children for the first time. It's kind of like this milestone thing. You want to make an heirloom. Even though my background as well, my mum did a lot of quilting in the 90s as well. I was definitely not a sewist for a long time. I'm originally a mechanical engineer. I used to work offshore on oil rigs, and yet here I am in the quilting world. It's very, very exciting to be here. I'm very much looking forward to hearing some stories, sharing some stories. It's a very, very powerful part of quilting.
Wonderful, thank you. And on to Aline and Natasha. We only have Aline right now, which is wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
To have her here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aline. Natasha is only in the workshop because she's actually preparing our upcoming classes. So we were all gonna miss Natasha, but I hope I can I can add something. Well, we started quilting in 2014 professionally since day one, and we do free motion quilting, custom quilting, and experiment with fabric. I love the diversity that we have in this panel. I think that is so rich and so valuable and valuable. Is that word correct? You know, I'm in Brazil.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hot here. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank B for having us. And I really love to be in part of the quilting world. I feel so proud when I see teachers talking about how they enter, etc. That's it. Have fun. I hope to have fun with all of you guys today.
Wonderful, thank you. And finally, Beth Ann.
Hi, I am in snowy Michigan this morning. Sounds like a lot of you are from warmer places. We have snow on the ground. I come from a family back east in basically New York and Pennsylvania of quilters. I have quilts in my own possession going back at least 4 generations on multiple sides of my family. So I'm really fortunate in that. I started out doing everything by hand. That's how I learned. But I have multiple sclerosis and a bunch of other autoimmune diseases. So I had to learn how to do everything by machine. And that has become my niche. is finding easier ways for people who are either short on time or have physical challenges that they're working with that can still get the results that they want to get. So that's kind of turned a hard thing into a good thing.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. And I've just noticed my own appearance is becoming more and more ethereal as the sun is rising behind me. So just that will sort itself out in a moment. So we do have this wonderful group of women here this morning, which is fantastic. And thank you all for joining us. And what I'd love to get started with is just kind of how you got into quilting and how you are connected to quilters from your past. I mean, Beth Ann, you've just mentioned having going back 4 generations on both sides of the family. So do you want to tell us like what those quilts are like and who those women were?
Sure, and you'll meet a couple of them, one in this panel and another one in the trunk show panel. But in my family, the tradition was you got a quilt for pretty much every major milestone in your life. You got a quilt when you were born. Of course, you got baby quilts. Usually there was a quilt when your mother was announced she was pregnant. And then you got, if you're the oldest like me, sometimes you were lucky and you got a big girl quilt when your little sister got a baby quilt. We got quilts when we went off to college. Got quilts when we moved. When I was a child, when we moved to different states and different countries. We always had quilts. The quilts when we got engaged, quilts when we got married. You get the idea. It was just something that was so much a part of life and something that I think always gave great comfort too. And the idea both that the women in my family felt like it was important to make things as beautiful as they could, even when they were working with feed sacks and flour sacks, as well as when they could buy fabric. And also just that sense of when you wrap up in a quilt made by somebody who loves you, it's like a hug. And that is something that I do too for the people in my life. When I make them a quilt, I tell them when you wrap up in this, you can feel the hug. And I think that's something that a lot of quilters will be able to relate to.
Absolutely, yes. And what about the rest of the panel? Like, how does quilting relate to your history? Yeah, Anne, go for it. Go ahead.
So the quilt that I'm going to be talking about today is the one hanging right here. My great grandmother made that, and this quilt is like what Beth Ann was just saying about family love and heritage. That's what I feel from this quilt. My great grandmother had 13 kids and 2 girls and 11 boys. And so this quilt is all made from boys' clothes, all by hand, completely by hand. Pattie can appreciate that. And I feel like it's one of my most prized possessions. And I feel really lucky to have it because my grandfather was one of 13 kids, right? How he ended up with it and then I got it. What are the odds, right? So it is well loved, let me tell you. And we used it for years and decades. And it's just
Absolutely.
I was speaking on Tuesday night at a guild and I feel like the love just gushed out of me when I was talking about it to her, and it's just really powerful. It's really affected my life.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Wonderful.
I must admit, I'm from a place where no one in my family was quilting really, and so it was largely a discovery from books and magazines. But Aline, what about you? I know when you started your quilting business, it was kind of from a standing start.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about it. Maybe I will cry today because the stories are so beautiful. But but we started quilting from nothing. Natasha's mom was taking classes by, I would say, 6 months, for 6 months. So she was as new as us, and as a beginner, I think it's fair to say that you don't even know the amount of things that you don't even know. So she was lost, and we were lost with her in this process. And she was like, wow, you're both talented. You can do this for a bit, because we were both unemployed. I can tell the story later. And then we were just, yeah, let's do it. So that's, I think, the other side of the story here. We are the very beginning of the quilting tradition, in not only in our family, because Natasha's mom is an avid quilter, but she also do a lot of other stuff. So we are the ones that are really hooked into it, and we teach our niece, and we teach our friends, and we like spread the word of quilting here in Brazil, which is not a very common thing. So it's so amazing to see all those stories, and to see that we are doing something that can potentially lead to that feeling someday in the future. So it really gets me emotional.
No, of course, yeah, because there's the kind of pride of starting it, and then there's also the connection back to the past that other people have as well. Ali, what about you? How did you get started in it all?
Well, I would say that actually being on the receiving end of a quilt, like having that gift experience, that experience that somebody gives you this piece of fabric that, embodies so much meaning, that was really the catalyst for me to start my business as well. So I did make a quilt before my first daughter was born, and my mom had made quilts and she sews. So I had kind of sewing, and my grandmother was a knitter. So there's kind of like handwork in the family, if you like. But really, when I'd had my first child, I was emotional, hormonal, all those sorts of things. A very young child at home, staying at home with her, and I got this knock on the door, and like the bell rang, and I thought, oh, who is this? I just put the baby down to sleep, and someone's ringing the doorbell. Who is it? So I went outside, and it was the post lady. And good old Italian bureaucratic post, they charge you money every single time you get anything from anywhere, whether it's a gift, whether it's whatever else. So I was always a bit kind of cranky seeing the post lady ringing my bell, because I'd have to pay her some money. And so she came with this package, and she's like, this is for you, but you need to pay me, like 30 euros or something like that. I'm like, okay, fine. Obviously someone sent me a gift for my new baby. This is amazing. But at the same time, I was pretty grumpy. Came inside, paid her the money, came inside with my package and sat down and opened it. And, floods of hormonal tears came out, because somebody had sent me a quilt. And it wasn't from my mom, it wasn't from my aunt, it wasn't from my grandma. It was from the mum of somebody who I went to college with, who I hadn't even seen for many, many years. And this woman, all the way from Australia, sent me this package. And the quilt's here with me now. It's, maybe not exactly my aesthetic or my colors, but this quilt has, a huge amount of meaning for me, in terms of this was really the catalyst that started my business, and a lot of the feelings that I like to share with people as well. Like, imagine creating that moment for somebody else, that feeling that you get when somebody gives you something as important as a baby quilt or a memorial quilt or a quilt for your wedding, or, it's a really special feeling. And so being able to kind of propagate that out, I think that ripple effect that we can have by sharing our work, sharing our designs, sharing our techniques and our experience, I think that is such a powerful part of being in this community, is being able to create those moments for other people. So that's kind of my beginning story for getting into quilting as well.
Oh, and how lovely. And it kind of ties in with Beth Ann's own story about having quilts to commemorate these different times. Pattie,
Absolutely.
what about you, Pattie? How
Well,
did you get started?
my quilting journey really actually started when I was a child. I was a very bookish girl. I loved to read. And the thing that I loved to read the most were like, Anne of Green Gables and Little House on the Prairie books and all of those kind of serial books. So the one thing those girls all did was learn to make quilts. So I told my mom, I'm actually blessed with a very crafty mom who was also a professional tailor.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Mom, I want to make a quilt. So she got me started. I made a little doll quilt and kind of fiddled around with doing strange quilts until I actually seriously got into quilting after my children were old enough to go to school, and I had time to go out and take a class, actually learn. I got into doing handwork on my quilts. The reason was because I had an old Singer sewing machine that my mother had bought me when I graduated from high school. This machine refused to sew a 1/4-inch seam. So I started doing everything by hand because I didn't have enough money to buy a new Bernina or anything like that. And I just fell in love with it. It was my bag. And being in the San Francisco Bay Area, I always tell people that I'm in a sea of art and contemporary quilters. It's very hard to find traditional quilters in this area, plus anybody who does handwork. But I was very blessed to find out that there is actually a hand quilting group called the Dorcas Hand Quilters in San Francisco. We all get together one day a week and hand quilt on big frames that are held up by little stanchions on the corners. And we all sit and quilt and gossip. And they're my people.
That's wonderful.
I love that.
Oh, I love that. I really love it.
Yeah, and it's we had I'm trying to remember their name now. We had someone at the last event who was making a quilt that was loads of different blocks by different like trans people and people from different genders and so on. And they were talking about having a community event where people would be able to hand quilt it around the frame, which of course is a very traditional way of quilting. And that was fascinating to talk to them and hear about the story of the quilt. I'm curious though, we've talked a little bit about like when people are given quilts. Do you yourselves do this now in your own lives? I don't know who wants to take this first.
I'll go first.
Yeah, Pattie.
I'm very stingy with my quilts. They're my babies. It's like if I give one away, it's like tearing it out of my hands, and it's like giving away a child. But I have done 2 quilts that I've given away. I did a quilt for my daughter when she went to college, and we call it the cat's bed quilt because the cats sleep on it. And I also gave a quilt to my daughter-in-law I did a witch's hat and it's a crabapple quilt pattern that I did, and she's very goth. She loves Halloween, and this is a woman who shows no interest at all in quilting. Actually asked me if I would give it to her, so I gave it to her. That's about it. You can have as many babies as you want, but my quilts stay with me.
Amazing. And Aline, I know you were nodding a moment ago when I was asking about this.
Here in Brazil, people don't know what a quilt is. Actually, of course, people know what a blanket is, but not the value, like the emotional value of a quilt. So we always tell to our students to give a little letter with the quilt so people can understand what it is. And then my tattoo girl, I have a lot of tattoos, and me and Natasha, we both tattoo with the same girl, and she was pregnant and she was having a baby, and we love her and her family, her husband, etc. So we were like, let's give her a quilt. Oh yeah. And then we made a Kraken quilt for the baby because it will be a little monster. That's our sense of humor.
I love it.
So we made a Kraken in a very fun quilt. It's very terrifying, but very fun. The field will not know. And we send a little letter with the quilt, and then I get chilled actually. She sent us a message saying that both of they cried over the quilt. And I get so emotional because it's not like when we say a Gucci, a Balenciaga bag, we know the value of that. I'm not the kind of person that value that, but we know how many dollars or how, we know stuff about that. But with quilts here, it's so different. So when we got that message, we were like, wow, this is legacy. This is actually what we bring into the world, like people connecting in the level of their souls. And I think it's so beautiful. That was the very first quilt that we gifted, actually, just last year, just this year. Oh, last year, 2024.
I know.
That's
I'm still getting
wonderful.
used to the year change. No, that's a lovely story. And
That's wonderful.
I just want to remind people who are watching on the Zoom that you can submit questions in the Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions you want of the panel. But I'm wondering, like, I suppose I'm thinking of Beth Ann was talking about this, but also I want to make sure we include like Ali and Anne as well in this conversation. But like, how many quilts is too many quilts? Because if you're getting a quilt like for a birthday or like a graduation and then an engagement and a wedding, what are you doing with all these quilts? Because that's a lot of
No,
quilts.
there's no such thing as too many quilts.
I agree.
I agree.
Some of them, and some of them get used till they fall apart, and that's okay. I make the distinction for myself between like show quilts and utility quilts. So shows that I might send to a gallery or save for a show or for teaching purposes or whatever, and shows that are quilts that I make for my family to use and wrap up in on the couch when we're watching TV and the cats to sit on and all that kind of stuff. And so, the utility quilts, they get used and until they are, fall apart basically.
Mm.
And I think that's okay. And then I do have other quilts that we generally don't use, or maybe just once in a while, but I use them for shows or for, teaching or for whatever. And some of them are specifically to pass down. So as these little, I have a quilt which is in this slide deck that we'll get to, that my great grandmother made, that we don't use because it's too fragile, but I treasure it and treasure the connection to her. And I think that I get a lot of joy out of giving quilts, but I did learn the hard way to make sure to think about when I'm giving a person a quilt, not to think about what it means to me only, but to think about what it means to them, and will they understand and will they value? If that person just will see it as a blanket to drag around, I'll make them something else, but if it's somebody who's really into quilts and understands what they represent and how much time and effort and resources go into it, then I love giving them a quilt and a hug with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing is that there's an old philosophy saying that a quilt is not a quilt until you sleep under it. So
if it's big enough.
Mhm.
True. Anne, did you want to come in?
Yeah. When I've given lots of quilts away, and most of them have been baby quilts, but I came to this point where I gave a quilt to someone who didn't like the way it looked. She appreciated the value of the quilt because her grandmother had just, I mean, she got it, right? But she was a really honest person to whether she likes something or not that you give her, which is fine, right? It was good for me to learn that. But what really set into me was, okay, yes, I want to be the person that gives this quilt because that's who I want to be. But I also want them to love it. I want it to be something they like. So I switched my mindset to, okay, I'm not going to make this for me. I'm going to make it for me because of the feeling and the person I want to be. But it needs to be their style, their colors, right? And that's when the turning point went to, like, the last year, my granddaughter turned 16 and I made her a quilt. But I also know she has her very own special style. And so I said, I'm going to make you a quilt but I want you to be in part of it all the way through. So I asked her, what colors do you want? And then I just started sending her patterns. She picked a pattern. Then I sent her um, all these little pictures of different quilt groupings, right? Or lines of quilting fabric. And we whittled it down. So she picked everything. And then I made it for her. And that way we both enjoyed the process. And it was fun to collaborate with her on it too. It was like an experience for us. And then on the back of the quilt, one of the gals at a store that I go to does embroidery, machine embroidery labels for people for free just because she loves it. So she made me a label like this big, and I wrote, it was like genealogy from your grandma on this date for your 16th birthday. It was wonderful to design this with you. It was our thing, you know? And so
That's wonderful.
that's kind of been like a turning point for me. And one of you had talked about some people don't know the value of quilts and some do. One time, I used to give all my friends baby quilts, and one of them started, my friend, like 10 years later, started taking sewing lessons from me when I had my sewing school. And one time she looked at me and she goes, I never really understood the value of the quilt that you made for me, but it means so much more to me now that I'm making this and I understand. So it was a really neat full circle moment for us to share. So
Absolutely. And I think you brought up an interesting point there about the importance of labeling quilts, which I know is something that everyone talks about a lot more often now. There's so many quilts in the kind of International Quilt Museum and other places that aren't labeled. And where we don't know the maker's name, never mind like why it was made. So it's yeah, absolutely vital to get at least some basic information on there and add that as a label. Ali, are you a quilt labeler?
I'm absolutely a quilt labeler. So engineering
Excellent.
background, I have a spreadsheet with all of the numbers of the quilts and next to them the
Oh,
description of the
love it.
quilts
Love it.
and the sizes of the quilts and who they were given to and the name of the pattern, whether I designed it, whether somebody else designed it. The batting material, because I changed from like an 80-20 cotton poly to cotton wool. And so just to kind of also track that over time, like if I get a quilt back or someone says I have a problem with the quilt or there's a, you know, some repair that needs to go on, understanding like the materials, I mean, maybe that's going a little bit too far, but it's kind of like a catalog. So good old Excel spreadsheet, document everything. And that actually also started from the first quilt that I got as well, because Robin, the maker of this quilt, numbers all of her quilts. So this quilt is 2017 number 53, and I think she's now up to 100 and something, but she numbers all of her quilts as well. So
I love
straight
that.
away, that was kind of like already in the ether of, you know, document, number, know who it is, all those kinds of things. And, you know, just looping back to how many quilts are too many quilts? I don't think that there's too many quilts going around. I mean, I've got 2 little nephews, 2 little kids of my own. I've made them small quilts, but now everyone's kind of graduated to big beds. So now they need another quilt because those quilts are too small. So like next phase of quilt, larger quilt, and then yeah, they change style, they change taste, they change whatever else. You also evolve. Like a lot of the quilts that I gave away at the very beginning, or the early quilts that I made, definitely don't represent the style that I have since developed of my own. So they don't really represent me anymore as a quilter. So I think the quilts that I would give now, they represent my own evolution, and they also represent the evolution in exactly what Anne was saying, you know, thinking about who's the person that you're giving the quilt to. Right now, I'm working on a quilt for a good friend of mine. He just got married in Istanbul to a Turkish woman. He's American. They kind of have this, you know, international relationship, and thinking about, okay, what kinds of colors am I going to use that might represent that or represent the people? How do I think about them? How do I visualize them? And also thinking, okay, well, what's their kind of aesthetic of their house going to be? Is this going to fit in? Are they going to want to bring it out onto the couch on, you know, when people are over? Or are they going to be like, oh, thanks for the ugly orange quilt or whatever, you know? I am under strict instructions not to use a specific color because it's the opposing team of of the main football
yeah.
team that this person
Oh gosh, yeah.
supports. So, you know, there are some
Mhm.
specifications.
Yeah, in fact, I was
But
interested.
otherwise, it's
Mm.
really thinking about that. And I have a friend who has a son, and I always think about him for whatever reason. I associate orange with him. I associate this specific color with this person. And it's not like I'm seeing an aura or anything like that around them, but I kind of have an association, a color association with different people. And so that's normally what I add to the quilts is like, this is how I think about you. These are the colors that I think about when I think about you.
That's
And that goes into the quilt as well. So hopefully sometimes that's a hit and not always a miss.
Absolutely. And this is something that I was thinking about when Anne was talking earlier about the process she'd been through with her granddaughter. My sister has I have been the recipient of a number of quilts over the years. She's got married and had 2 children and so on. And she said to me a few years ago, I think we have enough quilts now. Which I totally understood and I was fine with. But just recently, I've had a load of the 2 children's baby clothes, which of course is all like stretch jersey material, with the intention of making them into a quilt. And I was getting ready to get started, and she goes, "Oh well, actually, I would like a new quilt for the bedroom." But the aesthetic that she has is so different to mine, and we've narrowed it down. It's going to be like mostly white on white kind of thing, very little color, and a very traditional pattern, which is all blocks on point. And I do not do block. Well, I say I've got a cathedral window in the back, but apart from trying out new techniques, I do not generally do block quilts. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to be challenged in this way to work on something that isn't usually in my wheelhouse. Have other I incorporated clothing and or like kind of memorial items in? Anne, you got your hands up there.
Yeah, I have a picture of it. I wish I would have put that in. So when I have 4 kids, 3 boys, and my youngest is a girl. And when she was a baby, I thought, okay, I'm going to save all my favorite baby clothes of hers. And when she turns 18 or whatever, or when she has her first baby, I'll give her a quilt made with all of her baby clothes. The traditional where you see the whole clothes and it's just like a collage, right?
Mm.
So I decided to give it to her for her 18th birthday. But as I was playing around with all the clothes on the table, I just could not feel that design that I had planned. I kept feeling a piece of artwork, like a fiber art. And so what I ended up doing was actually making a piece like the size of one of these. And most of her clothes were knit also, right? So I put some fusible underneath them so it wouldn't stretch and everything. But I did the layered effect where you just lay one piece on the other, and then you just cut and then take one piece away and sew it together. So I made this piece of art for her with all of these baby clothes, putting in snaps and buttons and really fussy cutting around it, right? Even a little sweater. And then I hand stitched, I cut out labels and put those in. And it was so fun. And then I floated it on the background of a baby sheet that says, I love you all over it. And then I
Oh.
framed it in a window frame that we took from our old house when we replaced the windows with the house she was born and raised in. So this piece is her heritage. It's just so amazing. And I'm so happy with it. And she absolutely loves it. And it's something that she can put in her home her whole life.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, so much depth
Yeah.
to that piece. That's amazing. Yes. Anyone else have incorporated clothing or kind of meaningful fabrics into to something that they've made?
I did a quilt with, well, during lockdown, like a lot of people, I got my husband to clean his shirts out of his closet. And I did a whole, he had 30 shirts that he took out. And I was looking at them all and I couldn't send them. He had worn them through so that there were spots and grease and the cuffs were all bare. A lot of it couldn't go to the Goodwill or any of the shops. So, and I didn't want it to go to landfill. So I took a look at them, and they had a lot of usable fabric in it. And again, I had a lot of time on my hands, so I kind of developed a way of ripping them apart very fast to get to the fabric. And I call it deboning a shirt. And then I harvested the fabric and made a quilt out of it with all of his all of the different ones. I just actually cut pieces of the shirts up, stuck them in a brown paper bag, and pulled pieces out and added it to the next row and the next row, so I wouldn't overthink the whole thing. And it came out really nice. He's blue. He does navy blue, baby blue, whatever it is, a little bit of lavender thrown in. I liked it a lot, and it's so soft because the shirts had been so worn.
That's lovely.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then I'm wondering, because I know, Aline, I'm thinking particularly of one of your quilts, which I think is a Kraken quilt, actually. It might actually be the one that you were thinking of earlier. But it almost, you've told a story with your machine quilting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, we have, well, let's get to the point. That work of art is the very same pattern that we gifted our artists.
Oh.
Yeah, because she's an artist, so we give a very special present. Yeah, so that particular quilt, I don't know if I can show it here, but that quilt is actually a story. It's the Kraken myth. And the quilts that I'm showing today, they also have a poem to go with the quilt. So the quilt get a lot of depth in the sense of an art making when we explain that to people, because people actually don't even understand art. Usually people cannot understand art. As a fool, I'm not talking about just museum, nothing like that. People heard songs in the radio or any other media today, and they don't really appreciate or think of that. So I think it's our job as educators and artists to bring attention to those. So when we do a quilt that is more towards to design and more towards to a creation as an art, we also put together a poem to that quilt. So the story can be told completely, because it's like that test in museum. So you see an apple and you say, my nephew do that. And then you read a paragraph and you are, wow, this is amazing. So it's kind of that. And it's a story. It's actually the moment, the very second before the Kraken emerges and drags that boat. So it's about that feeling that something is popping out, but you cannot see the whole dimension of that. So it's bigger on the inside than on the outside at that particular moment. And yeah, it's a beautiful story. And it's a beautiful poem. I translated the poems for today, but that specifically I didn't.
Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I know you and Beth Ann are both in our trunk show that's taking place in just a couple of hours today. Yes, so we'll get to see that then, which will be fantastic. And so I know, Ali, you design a lot of quilts, you teach design. How important is that kind of storytelling element when it comes to designing a quilt?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I was just writing about this today, actually. The idea that when you share a story about something, just like what Aline said now, right? So you can look at something, whether you're in an art gallery, whether it's a quilt, whatever it is, you can look at the piece of work and say, oh yeah, I like that, yes or no. That's generally our first kind of take on something is, do I like this? Do I not like this? If you like it, you might look a little bit closer, or you might be offended by it. You might think, what is this all about? I want to find out. There's some kind of curiosity element. And then you might read the title, or you might read a little bit of the description of that piece of work. And then you're kind of drawn in a little bit more. And often the title is that first kind of entry point into the story of the artwork or the quilt, right? So what you title your quilt what you title your quilt pattern. This is often something that I talk about to my students as well when they want to market their quilt patterns or their quilts. You know, how do you capture somebody's attention? How do you capture somebody's interest in your work? And oftentimes through that title can be a little key into the story. It can unlock and start to unlock a little bit. And then having a description about what was behind the design, where you were when you came up with this design, how you found the elements that you incorporated in your design, why it's this particular way or these particular colors. I think all of that is that's really part of that storytelling of the quilt too. And it's so important for sharing the story as well as capturing someone's attention and bringing them into that story and welcoming them in.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And then I'm curious, this is a bit random, but Pattie, your workshop is on sashiko stitching. And is there a storytelling element to sashiko? This is just my own question, really.
I think that the storytelling element of it is mainly the history and how it developed. Sashiko was, if you're not familiar with it, it's a Japanese stitching technique that originally started to mend clothes, and it's become very popular through the visible mending movement that's going on now. Fabric was very expensive and was treated as something that was passed down from generation to generation in Japan in the very early history. Japan is a small country. All the places that were used to grow crops could not be used to grow linen or cotton to make fabric. So what happened is that all the clothing was mended and mended and mended using sashiko, which is a kind of a running stitch technique. That's how all of the patterns developed originally. After the industrialization, of course, fabric became more available in Japan, and it turned into an embroidery technique. Now, a lot of people talk about boro, which they misconstrue in the US or in the Western countries, saying that boro is the running stitch that you do. Boro is actually a concept in Japan of taking something that you mended and giving it new life and making it more beautiful. So that's what I always think about with sashiko and the techniques.
Oh, wonderful. You remind me of another quilter. Is it Zach Foster? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Where they've been doing a series of quilts where they've kind of destroyed the quilt and then made it into something new. So that kind of just brought that to mind.
It does kind of tie in because these garments were threadbare. And you would slap another piece of fabric on top of it that was probably also threadbare and stitch the two together, and it would be patched.
I know. I remember reading about boro and looking up some of the prices for items that are hundreds of years old and have made it through the centuries, and they are highly collectible now.
Oh, yes.
These original pieces.
Yes.
It's quite extraordinary. But I know you've got some examples not of boro, but of crazy patchwork. That is another way of telling stories and collecting memories.
Crazy quilts actually can be very historical for the times. Do you want to bring the photos up?
Yeah, let's bring the photos up. I know the first one, let me just share this now. So where are we? We are, sorry, I'm just working out where I was sharing this before.
Crazy quilts, actually, the craze of crazy quilts started in the Victorian times, and it was a way of teaching girls primarily their embroidery stitches and how to patch and how to sew. And it kind of like caught the Victorians by their roots, and they just went crazy over the crazy quilts. it's taking, here's some of them. Yeah.
Here we go.
Now, the one on the right is an antique crazy quilt. And when you look at them, you can actually see the history of the person who made it. There's a big beehive with Utah under it. So obviously, I think that the person lived in Utah. Up above it, in the corner on the right side, is a kind of like a fabric painting of their temple with the dates of some kind of anniversary of the temple, and it's probably a Mormon temple. If you go over to the left side with the anchor, there is probably some kind of sailors or seamen in their family. You go further down to that kind of light blue patch with the moon and stars, that's the Big Dipper. That might be a clue. That might have been up in the sky as a constellation when something important happened to that family. And then just right underneath it, you see kind of like a little bloom-like shape of yellow. That's actually Halley's Comet. And you see that quite often in antique crazy quilts. I put a picture over on the left of Halley's Comet. It comes every 75 years and it's very regular. This, the picture that I put up is a woodcut with Halley's Comet from 1835. The next time it came was 1910. So since this quilt has Halley's Comet in it, it has the Utah state, which is called the Beehive State. Down further, there's a log cabin with a date on it, which might have been the date when the family came to Utah. You can put this all together and find out the history of the family. And the arrival of Halley's Comet in 1910 probably means this quilt was made around 1910 or 1911. Then in the center, that quilt is a more contemporary quilt. I'll do this really fast, by Judith Baker Montaro. And she actually included embroideries and pictures of her family and the places that her family emigrated from. And the center is a picture of their ranch in Alberta, Canada. So again, this is all the family history of this. And do you want to go to the next slide, Bea?
Yeah,
let's show you my quilt.
Yeah, let's talk about this just briefly because I know we've got pictures from Beth Ann after this as well.
This one is called beautiful. It's called Going Crazy in Lockdown. And the quilt itself is up in the upper left-hand corner. When I started this quilt, I made it, I was going to, during lockdown, all of my quilting lectures and workshops, of course, got canceled. I ended up having a lot of time on my hands. So I thought I would go ahead and do this quilt and kind of show off my embroidery stitches. So down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see where I started making really elaborate embroideries. Then I kind of had an epiphany that, this is like a historic time in my life, and I wanted to document it. So what I did is on the lower left, or excuse me, on the lower right-hand side, there's a picture of the coronavirus. I don't know if you remember seeing that picture all the time on news reports.
Gosh, yeah.
Put the 2020 year into it. And then I used some typical Victorian symbols with the good luck horseshoe. The flower to the left of the horseshoe is a Johnny Jump Up, which is my son's birth flower. My daughter's birth flower, an aster, is to the right. I did a lot of gardening. My garden kept me sane during this whole issue. And so I put a snail in there because we have a ton of snails in San Francisco. And this is the whole quilt on the upper left.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
So this is my interpretation of lockdown history.
Oh, thank you, Pattie. And you're right. It has definitely captured this moment in time. that happened. And then Beth Ann, I know you also had
Mhm.
some pieces in here as well.
Mhm.
Tell us about this.
Yeah. There's several pictures, so I'll go fast. This is my grandma, my great grandmother, Angie Elizabeth Ackley Browning, and those are her initials. AEA on the quilt. I've taken a close up so you can see her initials. And if you want to go to the next one, I've just taken a series of close-ups of the quilt, and I just feel a strong sense of connection holding the quilt. And I mentioned this earlier. I feel like it is such a validation of women as creative people and is more than being, mother, a wife, or whether you're married or not, community responsibilities. It's so easy to fall into all, I should do this, I should do this, I should do this. And I feel like there's a wonderful tradition of honoring women's creativity and taking time to do something that is strictly ornamental just for the pleasure. And this has untold hours of ornamentation. And she did plenty of utility sewing and quilting in the meantime, but this was just for her because it gave her pleasure.
Yeah.
And the next one.
Yeah. Oh,
I think the fabrics range from fancy silks, some of which have shattered over time, to more durable fabrics. And it suggests to me, looking at the fabrics close up, that clothing scraps, and I don't mean scraps necessarily from when clothes were worn, but also from when they were made. So it was new fabric, but left over from when something was cut. Suggests that both the men's clothes and the women's were included. And there are articles of the time where they talked about women cutting up their husbands' ties, and I think Angie did that also. And you can go to the next one. The quality of the hand embroidery also suggests to me that either Angie continued to work on the quilt after her eyes were starting to age and deteriorate, like many of us are, or that she had help from one or both of her daughters. And if you just compare the little urn at the bottom versus the other flowers, you can definitely see there's a difference in the amount of detail and the complexity of the embroidery. But either way, I think it was definitely a labor of love.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely
And
beautiful.
yeah,
Is there an, oh, here we go.
there
This is
is.
you.
There's just two more. Yep. Fast forward to me, and I was born just over a century after my great grandmother Angie. And this is a quilt that I made actually back in the early 1990s. But I was suffering from severe homesickness. I'd been in the hospital, couldn't travel, and all my family was back east in New York and Pennsylvania, New Jersey. And I was just having a hard time with it. And my husband, who is infinitely wise, looked at me and he said, "Go sew." He said, I'll watch the kids because we had two babies. I'll watch the kids. You just go do that. And so I went in there, and our bedroom, my sewing room, had a bed in it, or our bedroom had a sewing machine, depending on how you looked at it. And I just started just pulling up scraps and making this. And if you want to go to the next screen, B, this is the last one. I put all of the names of my closest friends and extended family, even our cats, are included on this quilt. So it's a snapshot of a very specific time in my life. And every time I see it, it just brings me joy and comfort. It came from such a place of sadness, but I like put that in there, and now I just see the love, and I feel so the connection to all those people every time I handle this quilt or see it.
I love that, and I'm just gonna take us back quickly to the first picture in this deck, because this is almost where we started, because Anne, you were talking about how this quilt, this is your great grandmother's quilt, was it, or your grandmother's quilt?
This one right here.
That one, about how you felt when you held that quilt as well.
That's one reason I took a picture with it. This picture's for my website and my brochures and stuff. And I apologize for putting my picture in here, not just the quilt, but that's the only picture I had of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like I said, this quilt represents a lot of things that y'all have talked about today. Old clothes,
Oops,
right?
sorry.
Um,
There we go.
it's just, I feel like when I look at it, I can picture her. And I really only saw my great grandmother 2 times, and I was like
Mm,
third grade. So it's just kind of a hazy memory of her. But she was really poor. They lived in the Dust Bowl in Texas in the early 1900s with 13 kids, and the boys were wild, let me tell you. Um, and I could just picture her sitting on the porch, hand sewing, and just trying to find some quiet time for herself and having no money, no funds. That's where she really was able to express herself creatively. And for all of us creative people, we've got to do that to feel good in a lot of situations. We feel like our authentic selves when we're creating, if we're creators. And I just love being able to picture her in my own mind, my own story that I make up of what her life must have been like. And no electricity, right? I mean, out on
yeah.
the plains in a little house with dirt floors or whatever. But it's really special. And I I also think that part of these old quilts, and I'm sure you all know this, but it's a really great study in fabric, right? What fabrics
Mm.
last, what don't.
Mhm.
Red is notoriously bad in this quilt, and what was used for the batting, and I just love seeing every single hand stitch in this, and it's wonderful. I just love it.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I think that the idea that all of our quilts, like each stitch connects the recipient back to the creator, and through history as well. Before we go, I just want you all to share where people can see more of your work or can find out more about you, because of course you're all teaching as part of this event. But do you just want to quickly sign off and say your website or your social, whichever one you prefer? The order I've got you in now, I don't know if it's the same as before, is Pattie, Anne, Aline, Ali, and Beth Ann. So Pattie, do you want to sign off?
My website is Pattie, and it's spelled Pattie, handquilts.net. And I'd also like you to see if you, I'm offering a free subscription to my Substack newsletter, which is at Pattie, Pattie.substack.com. If you'd like to go in there, it's called The Joy of Handwork.
Lovely, thank you. And Anne?
My website is AnneCardosaCoaching.com, and Anne has an E, A-N-N-E, and Cardosa has an S, not a Z. I wish I had a Z because everybody thinks it's there, but it's S.
And of course, Anne is one of our sponsors for this event, our key sponsor, and we'll be doing live coaching during one of the sew-along sessions tomorrow. So please sign up for that, and her workshop is available today. Aline, tell us about where to find you.
Well, I've prepared slides for today, but I was lost. I couldn't share them. But okay,
Oh.
You can see. Yeah, I think I should have told you that I have prepared them.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. That was on me. I'm so sorry that I couldn't share with people. But you can see here our Instagram and our email and our site. We have workshops. We have a very affordable live workshop coming on from 2 weeks from now in January, and it will be a lot of fun. So I hope to see everyone in this workshop. And if you have any questions, just pop them in our email.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ali, how about you?
I'm aliryde.com. So just the way my name's spelled, if you can see my name up on Zoom, it's ALLYRYDE.com. Same place. You can jump on there and you can find out all about my programs. You can grab a free guide. And as part of Quilt and Learn, I'm offering the Scrap Fabric Design Masterclass. So we've been talking a lot about using fabrics, different kinds of fabrics. It's a great way to use up your scraps, be inspired and not obligated by your scraps, which I always find is a good step to take. So
Absolutely. And last but definitely not least, Beth Ann, how about you?
A good place to start is my shop. It's just shop, SHOP Beth Ann Williams. And mine is the plain variety of Ann. It's just ANN. And BethAnnWilliams.com. And that has links to my freebies, my online classes that I teach, the blog, booking information, and lots of free tutorials and information and reviews. So you have fun.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all for taking part today. Thank you to our wonderful audience for listening to us. And and we'll have another event starting in just about 2 hours. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
thank you. Have
Bye.
a great
Thank you.
event.
Take care.
Thank you.